The look on her face when the folder landed on the table in front of her, that is an image I will carry to my grave. 63 years old, and I had never once considered myself a dangerous woman. But that evening in a banquet hall in Savannah, Georgia, surrounded by 300 people in formal wear and pearl necklaces, I discovered that the most dangerous thing in any room is a retired IRS auditor who has been pushed too far. My name is Patricia Holloway. Most people call me Pat. I spent 31 years auditing tax returns for the federal government in a gray office building in Nashville, Tennessee. I am not glamorous. I drive a 2017 Honda Civic. I clip coupons on Sunday mornings. I read mystery novels and grow tomatoes in my backyard and call my daughter every single night at 8 o'clock. I have been doing that last thing since she left for college at 18, and I have never once missed a night. Her name is Claire. She is 30 years old, a physical therapist at a rehabilitation center downtown. She has her father's patience and his green eyes, and she has my stubborn streak, which has served her well and gotten her into trouble in equal measure. Her father passed away 11 years ago. A heart attack at 54, the kind that comes without warning and takes everything with it. Since then, it has been just the two of us. That is all we have ever needed. So when she called me last October with a voice I had not heard since prom night, giddy, nervous, falling over her own words, I set down my mystery novel and gave her my full attention. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me." "I met someone. At work. He came in for knee rehabilitation after a skiing accident, and we started talking, and now we have been seeing each other for 4 months, and I did not tell you sooner because I wanted to be sure, and Mom, I think I am sure." I asked his name. "Derek Ashford." I did not recognize it immediately. She told me his family owned Ashford Properties, one of the largest private real estate development firms in the Southeast, headquartered in Savannah. His father, Gerald Ashford, had built the company from a mid-sized construction operation into something that touched every commercial corridor between Atlanta and Charleston. His mother, Constance Ashford, sat on the boards of 3 charities and was, according to my daughter, one of the most elegant women she had ever seen. I asked the question I always ask. "Is he kind to you?" Claire laughed. "He is wonderful, Mom. He listens. He remembers things. He showed up to my apartment last week with soup because I mentioned on Monday that I had a scratchy throat. That is the detail that got me. The soup. A man who shows up with soup is a man paying attention. So I exhaled and I told her I was happy for her, and I meant it. I met Derek in December. Claire brought him to Nashville for the weekend, and I made my chicken piccata, which is my version of a first impression. He was 34, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going slightly silver at the temples. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never worried about money, but he wore it without arrogance. Or so it seemed. He helped clear the table without being asked. He asked me about my career with what felt like genuine curiosity. He looked at Claire the way her father used to look at me across crowded rooms, like she was the only fixed point in a spinning world. I liked him. I want to be honest about that. I liked him quite a lot. And I told my friend Rosemary so over coffee the following week. Rosemary has been my closest friend for 22 years. She is a retired family court judge, and she has seen enough human nature to be suspicious of everything, which is why I value her opinion. "Sounds promising," she said, "but you have not met the mother yet." I met Constance Ashford in February at a dinner in Savannah. Claire and I drove down together, 3 hours in the Honda with a playlist of Carole King and Fleetwood Mac, talking about everything and nothing. Claire was nervous in a way she tried to hide. She kept adjusting her earrings in the visor mirror. I told her to stop fussing. She told me to stop noticing. The Ashford home was the kind of house that is referred to as an estate without irony. A white antebellum structure set back from a live oak avenue, with gas lanterns burning at the gate, and a circular driveway where a man appeared from nowhere to park our Honda alongside 2 BMWs and a Range Rover. Claire squeezed my hand before we went in. Constance met us in the foyer. She was in her early 60s, slim and straight-backed, silver-haired in the way that looks intentional and expensive. She wore a cream silk blouse and a single strand of pearls that I knew without being told were not costume jewelry. She kissed Derek on the cheek and then turned to us with a smile that arrived precisely on cue. "Claire," she said warmly, taking my daughter's hands. "You look lovely as always. And Mrs. Holloway, Derek has told me you worked for the government for many years." "The IRS," I said. 31 years. "How interesting," she said, in a tone that suggested it was not interesting at all. "Please, come in. Dinner is almost ready." Gerald Ashford was easier. A large, ruddy man who laughed too loud and refilled glasses without asking and told stories about fishing in the Gulf that went on longer than they needed to. He shook my hand with both of his and called me Pat within 30 seconds. He was the kind of man who made you feel welcome and then let his wife handle everything that actually mattered. Dinner was prepared by someone I never saw. 5 courses, linen napkins, candles. Constance guided the conversation like a conductor, asking Claire polite questions that contained within them smaller, sharper questions. Where had she gone to school? "The State University," Claire said. Constance nodded as though she had guessed correctly. "And her apartment? Was it near the hospital?" "Yes, a rental in Midtown." Another nod. "Did she have plans to buy eventually, or was the rental market more practical for her situation?" Claire answered everything with grace. I watched her from across the table and felt a familiar ache, the kind that comes from watching your child perform a version of themselves for someone else's approval. At one point, Constance turned to me. "You must be so proud of Claire for making her own way," she said. "It cannot have been easy after losing your husband. Raising a child alone on a government salary." Claire stiffened almost imperceptibly. I picked up my fork. "We managed beautifully," I said. "Of course you did," Constance said, and lifted her wine glass. "Of course." The engagement happened in April. Derek proposed at the Botanical Garden in Nashville, and Claire called me from a bench in the rose section, laughing and crying at the same time, holding out her phone so I could see the ring on her finger through the screen. I told her she was beautiful. I told her I was over the moon. And mostly I was. But that night I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold and thought about Constance Ashford's voice when she said managing beautifully, something in the architecture of it. The particular arrangement of kindness and condescension that I had learned, over 31 years of government work, to recognize as a form of control. I decided to do what I had always done when something did not add up. I started looking at the numbers. It is a habit of the profession. When I worked at the IRS, we were taught that the story people tell and the story the records tell are 2 different stories, and the truth lives somewhere in between. I had no reason to suspect anything specific. I simply could not let go of the feeling that I was looking at a return that was too clean, too tidy, all the right deductions in all the right places. I started with public records. Ashford Properties LLC, incorporated in Georgia, with subsidiaries in South Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee. I spent 3 evenings at my computer pulling Secretary of State filings, property transaction records, court dockets, the kind of documents that are technically public but that nobody looks at because they require patience and a working knowledge of how to navigate county databases. What I found in the first week was unremarkable. The company was large and profitable and had the kind of legal activity contractor disputes, permit appeals that any development firm of that size accumulates. Nothing alarming. What I found in the second week gave me pause. There were 2 lawsuits, both settled confidentially, from former tenants of Ashford residential properties. The case files were sealed, but the docket entries told a partial story. Both involved habitability complaints. One was filed in 2019, one in 2021, both resolved within 6 months of filing, quickly enough that no hearing was ever held, efficiently enough that no details entered the public record. I noted it. I kept looking. Then I found something personal, and I found it the way you find most personal things by accident. I was in Savannah in June for a weekend visit. Claire and Derek were apartment hunting, looking at places near his office, and I had an afternoon to myself. I was walking through Forsyth Park with a coffee when I saw Gerald Ashford at a picnic table near the fountain. I was about to raise my hand to wave when I noticed he was not alone. Sitting across from him was a woman, perhaps 40, dark-haired, laughing at something he had said. He reached across the table and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear with the easy familiarity of a man doing something he had done 1,000 times. I turned and walked the other way. My coffee went cold in my hand. I told myself it could be innocent. Old friends, a cousin, a colleague whose hair happened to need tucking. I told myself that for about 48 hours. Then I called a man named Franklin Cross, who had been a private investigator in Nashville for 15 years. I had hired him once before, a decade ago, when someone at my daughter's college was harassing her and the university was moving slowly. He was thorough and discreet and did not make me feel foolish for asking. I told him what I had seen. I told him about the sealed lawsuits. I told him I might be a protective mother who was seeing shadows that were not there, and I asked him to tell me honestly if that was the case. He called me 3 weeks later. The woman in the park was named Dana Reeves. She was 41, a marketing consultant, and she had been involved with Gerald Ashford for 9 years. She had a daughter, 7 years old, whose birth certificate listed the father as unknown, but Franklin had found enough to suggest otherwise. Gerald had purchased a condominium in a beach community south of Savannah and listed it under a company name that had no connection on paper to Ashford Properties. He had been paying the maintenance fees and the property taxes every year without fail. I sat in my car in my own driveway and stared at the garage door for a long time. Franklin was not finished. He had pulled on the thread of the sealed lawsuits and found where it led. Both cases involved Ashford residential buildings with documented structural issues, a plumbing system in one property that had been flagged by a private inspector and then cleared by a city inspector whose name appeared 3 times. In Ashford construction approvals over 6 years. The second case involved a roof that had been repaired with materials below code specification. Franklin had found a former Ashford project manager, now working for a competing firm, who had signed an affidavit for one of the plaintiffs before the settlement killed the case. The affidavit described a pattern of signing off on substandard work and submitting falsified inspection reports. I thought about the families living in those buildings, people who had signed leases and paid deposits and trusted that the walls around them were what they were supposed to be. I thought about what it meant to know and say nothing. I paid Franklin. I drove inside. I spread everything across my kitchen table and sat with it for a week. My hesitation was Claire. It is always Claire. She was happy in a way I had not seen since before her father died, settled, looking forward. Derek was attentive and present and all the things that matter. If I brought this to her now, she would either disbelieve me or be destroyed by it. Either way, I would be the one holding the match. I called Rosemary. I drove to Knoxville and sat at her kitchen table and put the documents in front of her and told her everything. She read through them slowly. She did not say anything for a while. Then she looked up. "Pat," she said, "if you do nothing, and this all comes out later and it will come out, Claire will be standing in the middle of it. She will have tied her life to a family whose foundation is rotten, and she will know you knew." "I know." Rosemary folded her hands. "You also have a daughter who is strong enough to handle the truth. You have raised her that way." "I know that too." "Then you already know what you have to do. You are just afraid of what it costs." She was right. I drove home, and I kept working. I organized everything. I had been doing that for 31 years, making things legible, making the record clear, removing ambiguity. I knew how to build a file that told its own story. And then something happened that took the choice out of my hands entirely. 3 weeks before the wedding, I drove to Savannah for a final dress fitting with Claire. The fitting was at 2 in the afternoon. I arrived early and let myself into Derek's apartment with the spare key Claire had given me. She had asked me to drop off a garment bag she had left there. The apartment was quiet. I hung the bag in the closet, and I was pulling the front door closed behind me when I heard voices in the hallway. I stepped back inside without thinking. Derek and another man I recognized as his college friend Garrett came through the door. They were deep in conversation and did not see me standing in the entryway, half hidden by the open closet door. Garrett was talking. "You are really going to go through with it? After everything with the Tennessee deal falling through?" Derek laughed, and it was not the laugh I had heard at my kitchen table over chicken piccata. It was something flatter. "Of course I am. The timing actually works out. Claire has a steady income. She is not going to ask complicated questions, and when the company restructures, it looks better to have a son who is settled. My mother has been on me about optics for 2 years. Garrett said something I could not fully hear. Derek's voice again, closer. "She is a good person. I am not saying she is not, but you know what she is, Garrett. She is manageable." Her mother is this retired government worker from Nashville, coupon clipping, Honda Civic, no connections, no money, nobody who is going to cause problems. Claire just wants to be loved. That is the easiest kind of person to be married to. I did not move. I do not think I breathed. He kept talking. There is going to be some restructuring in the next year. The company needs to consolidate, and Dad needs the optics to hold while the attorneys figure things out. A son's wedding is good optics. A daughter-in-law with a stable healthcare job and no family complications is good optics. They moved toward the kitchen. I let myself out the front door without a sound. I sat in my Honda in the parking garage for 40 minutes. I thought about the soup. I thought about the way he looked at her across crowded rooms. I thought about how easy it is to perform love for someone who wants to believe it. Then I drove to the dress fitting and watched my daughter stand on a little platform in white satin, turning slowly, her face luminous in the mirror, and I thought, she deserves to make this choice herself. I cannot make it for her, but I can make sure she has everything she needs to make it with open eyes. The wedding was on a Saturday in September at a venue on the Savannah waterfront. 350 guests, a jazz quartet during cocktail hour, centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The Ashfords had arranged everything. Claire had told me once, laughing, that Constance had taken over the planning with such efficiency that it barely felt like Claire's wedding at all. I had not laughed. I wore a steel blue dress that Claire had helped me choose, and I carried a clutch bag that was larger than strictly fashionable because of what I needed to fit inside it. The ceremony was in a garden at the water's edge. Claire was breathtaking. She walked down the aisle with her head high and her green eyes bright, and she did not look nervous at all. She looked certain. I sat in the front row and watched Derek watch her walk toward him, and I could not tell anymore what was real and what was performance. And I understood then that it does not matter, because the only thing that is mine to control is the truth. The reception moved inside after sunset. Dinner was served, the jazz quartet played, and the toasts began. Gerald went first. A warm, rambling tribute to his son that lasted 8 minutes and mentioned fishing twice. A college friend made jokes. Derek's sister offered something heartfelt. Then Constance stood. She tapped her glass, and the room settled. She was poised in silver and ivory, a woman accustomed to the silence of rooms adjusting for her. "I have been looking forward to this moment," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the room. "When Derek first told us about Claire, I will admit I had questions. Not about her character is lovely, but we have certain hopes for our children, certain expectations that come with the life we have built, and Claire, bless her heart, comes from different circumstances than ours, simpler circumstances. She did not have our opportunities, our connections, our background." She paused and smiled at my daughter. "But I have watched her work so hard to fit in, to learn our world, and I believe that with time and the right guidance, she will become exactly what this family needs. To Claire, may she always remember how fortunate she is." Glasses rose. People drank. Someone near the back applauded. I looked at Claire. Her chin was up and her smile was fixed, and she was staring at a point somewhere past Constance's left shoulder, the way you stare at something when you are willing yourself not to cry in front of 350 people. I put down my champagne. I stood up. Constance was already handing the microphone back to the MC when she saw me rise. She paused. "Mrs. Holloway?" I walked toward the stage. I heard murmuring begin in the room behind me. I heard Claire say my name once, quietly, a question. I stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening," I said. "For those I have not met, my name is Patricia Holloway. I am Claire's mother. I spent 31 years as an auditor for the Internal Revenue Service, and I want to first say that watching my daughter today has been the greatest joy of my life." The room waited. "I also want to respond to something that was just said," I continued. "Claire does come from modest circumstances. We did not have an estate. We did not have gas lanterns at the gate. After her father died, we had each other and a small house in Nashville and a garden that grew excellent tomatoes. And I want to say, clearly and without ambiguity, that there is nothing about my daughter's background that requires adjustment, guidance, or a family's gracious permission to improve. Silence, the particular kind of silence that precedes something." I reached into my clutch. I pulled out the folder. "Now," I continued, I would like to share some information about the Ashford family, because I believe everyone in this room, and especially my daughter, deserves to make their decisions with accurate information. Gerald Ashford stood up from the head table. Patricia, this is not the place. I looked at him directly. Gerald, I said, your name is on a property deed for a beach condominium in Brunswick, Georgia, held under Coastal Meridian LLC, which you have been using to support a second family for 9 years. You have a 7-year-old daughter whose existence your wife does not know about, paid for with company funds. The sound that went through that room was unlike anything I have heard before or since. Victoria, I mean. Constance turned to look at her husband. Her hand was completely still on the tablecloth. That stillness was the most frightening thing in the room. I kept going. I did not let myself stop because I knew if I stopped, I would not start again. Ashford Properties has 2 sealed civil settlements involving habitability violations in residential buildings. A former project manager submitted an affidavit describing a pattern of falsified inspection approvals and below-code construction materials. Families have been living in buildings that were not built to standard, and those findings were buried with confidential settlements. I have the documentation here. I am happy to share it with anyone who would like to review it, including the journalists and the city inspector's office. Someone near the back of the room was already on their phone. I heard the word attorney. I set the folder on the edge of the stage. I looked at Derek. And to my future son-in-law, I said, 3 weeks ago, I was in your apartment when you came home with your friend Garrett. You did not know I was there. I heard you describe my daughter as manageable. I heard you describe her as good optics. I heard you say that she just wants to be loved, and that makes her the easiest kind of person to be married to. Silence from Derek. His face had the stillness of someone calculating. I looked at Claire. She was looking at Derek, and the expression on her face was not grief yet. It was the expression of someone watching a picture they had believed in for a year rearrange itself into something they had never seen before. The expression of someone understanding. I stepped down from the stage. I handed the folder to a woman I had been introduced to at the cocktail hour as a features writer for the Savannah Morning News. She looked at me with wide eyes and took it. That is the record, I said. Do with it what you think is right. The room came apart slowly, and then all at once. Constance stood and walked out through the nearest exit without a word to anyone, moving with the precise, controlled steps of a woman who has decided that composure is the only thing she has left. Gerald tried to follow and was intercepted by 2 men I did not recognize who may or may not have been attorneys. Derek pushed back his chair and went after Claire, who had already left the table. I found her 20 minutes later outside, sitting at the end of a dock over the water. She had taken off her heels. Her feet were bare against the weathered wood, and she was looking out at the dark water like she was waiting for something to surface. I sat down beside her. I did not say anything. After a long time, she said, "How long have you known?" "A few months," I said. She was quiet again. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I was afraid you would not believe me. And because I was afraid you would believe me and hate me for it. And because you were happy and I did not know how much of what I had was real." She put her head on my shoulder. It was the same gesture she had been making since she was 4 years old, leaning into me, and every time it happens, it rearranges something in my chest. "It was real to me," she said. "I really loved him." "I know, sweetheart. That is the worst part," she said. Not that he was lying, but that I was not. I put my arm around her and we sat there at the end of the dock while behind us, 350 people sorted themselves out and the jazz quartet packed up their instruments and the caterers moved through the emptying room like the port in Darius Clode. Tide going out. The story broke on Monday. The morning news ran it online first, then in print 2 days later. By Thursday, it had been picked up by 3 regional outlets and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The Georgia Department of Community Affairs opened an inquiry into the habitability complaints. The city inspector, whose name appeared in the Ashford approvals, was placed on administrative leave while the investigation was conducted. Gerald Ashford resigned from the company board within 2 weeks, citing health reasons, which fooled nobody. Constance filed for divorce in October. She sold the Savannah house and moved to her sister's place in Charleston. I have not heard her name since. Derek called Claire once. She let it go to voicemail. Then she blocked the number. She has told me that she does not regret that decision, and I believe her because she does not say things she does not mean. For a while, things were difficult between us. Not because she blamed me. Claire is too clear-headed for misdirected blame. But grief is a landscape that takes time to cross, and she needed to cross it at her own pace without me hovering at her elbow. I gave her space when she asked, and I answered when she called, and I never once pushed. 5 months after the wedding that never finished, she drove to Nashville for the weekend. We made soup from scratch on Saturday afternoon, her father's recipe, the one I have made every winter since he died. She chopped the carrots and I handled the stock, and we talked about her caseload at the rehabilitation center and a podcast she had been listening to and whether I needed new gutters on the back of the house. At some point over dinner, she looked up and said, "I have been thinking about something. Tell me." I think I was so grateful someone like Derek wanted me that I stopped asking whether I wanted him. I think I mistook being chosen for being loved. I set down my spoon. "Your father chose me," I said. "Every single day for 23 years. That is what love is. Not a single moment. 1,000 mornings of choosing." She nodded slowly. "I know that now." "I know you do." Last spring, Claire started seeing someone. His name is Marcus, and he is a structural engineer, which I appreciate for reasons that are both practical and symbolic. He grew up in Chattanooga, third of 4 children, parents still married after 38 years. He is quiet and precise, and he makes Claire laugh in the particular way she laughs when something has genuinely surprised her. He showed up to my house in April with a lemon pound cake he had made himself because he had heard, through Claire, that it was my favorite. That is how you know. He asked me recently, over coffee in my kitchen while Claire was in the garden, what I had been thinking when I stood up at that reception. I considered the question. "I was thinking about my daughter," I told him. "And I was thinking about all those families in buildings that were not safe. And I was thinking about what it means to know something true and decide it is inconvenient to say so." He nodded, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table. "Were you scared?" he asked. "Terrified," I said. "But I have found, in 63 years, that the things worth doing usually are." Gerald Ashford's legal situation is still working its way through the courts. These things take time, but the inquiry is real, and the record is public, and the families in those buildings have been notified, and some of them have contacted attorneys of their own. A few of them wrote to the paper after the story ran, and the paper forwarded their letters to me. I have read every one. I keep them in the front pocket of the folder that I have not yet found a reason to throw away. Last month, Claire called me on a Thursday evening, which is unusual. She calls every night at 8, but Thursday was 6:30, and when I saw her name on my phone, I felt the small clutch of unreasonable fear that every parent knows. I answered immediately. "Mom," she said, "I have news." "What kind of news?" "The good kind." She paused the way she always pauses when she wants the moment to land. Marcus proposed. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not gracefully, just sat down right there on the tile. She laughed at the sound I made. "Mom?" "I am on the floor," I said. I just sat down on the floor. She laughed again, the real laugh, the surprised one. "He asked for my opinion first," she told me. "Before he asked me. He said he wanted to make sure the most important woman in my life was on board." I pressed my hand flat against the kitchen tile and felt the familiar solidity of my own house around me, the tomato plants outside the window going golden in the October light, the soup pot on the stove, the folder on the counter. "Tell him yes," I said. "Tell him the most important woman in your life is absolutely on board." I hung up and sat on the floor for a little while longer, 63 years old, and I was sitting on the kitchen floor in November, crying the way you cry when everything you were afraid of losing turns out to still be there. I thought about Constance Ashford in her sister's house in Charleston. I thought about Gerald paying legal fees he had not anticipated. I thought about Derek, wherever he was, calculating his next best option. And I thought about what it cost me to stand up in that room, the shaking in my hands, the long drive home alone, the months of waiting for Claire to come back to me, not as the daughter she had been, but as the woman she was becoming. Every bit of it was worth it. I spent 31 years in a gray office building making sure the record reflected the truth. People thought that was a small life, a coupon clipper's life, a Honda Civic life. But what I know, that those people do not, is that the record is everything. The record is what remains. Long after the dinner parties and the pearl necklaces and the gas lanterns at the gate have all gone dark, the record is what tells the story of who you actually were. I have been a mother for 30 years and a government auditor for 31, and both of those things taught me the same lesson in different languages. You cannot build anything that lasts on numbers that do not add up. And you cannot love someone truly by making them feel like something that needs to be overcome. If you are listening to this, if you have ever sat across a table from someone who smiled at you like a closed door, who called your whole life modest, who used the word simple as a weapon wrapped in a compliment, I want you to hear me. Your life is not a footnote to theirs, and you are not required to be grateful for their permission to exist in their world. Stand up, speak clearly, bring documentation. The truth always outlasts the people trying to bury it.